Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. And I'm here with Lisa Kahn, who is a founder who we've had, among many other things she's done in life, fighting polarization, working at some company that's now called Meta, et cetera. She is a founder who started a company called GatherRound, in which we're fortunate to invest. And that company was acquired by Donut, in which we're also fortunate to be investors. And Lisa, I have seen you bring the methods of your prior work into how we relate to each other in the workplace. And so I'm so grateful that you're here. And today's question is it weird to make friends at work? Is it weird not to? And I've got some personal stories around this that I'm happy to share, but I would just love to hear how you think about it.
Yeah, I want to hear your stories. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, Roy. This is such a treat. Okay, my high-level answer to this question, with anything there are exceptions and nuances, is that no, it is not weird to make friends at work. And yes, it's kind of weird not to. And I'm happy.
Yeah, and I'm going to bracket for a second that at some point, keep talking about it, but at some point I want to get to the following question about that, which is what sometimes it's weird.
Yeah, totally.
And so when is it weird? Anyway, but keep going. So yes, so your short answer to the question is it is not weird to make friends at work.
And so I would go so far as to say it's kind of weird if you don't.
Not to. Amen. All right, sorry, keep going. I'm listening.
Okay, let's talk about the data and then I'll just share some personal stories. Yeah. Roy, I want to hear yours. Most people do want to make friends at work. And this is so true that Gallup, which is one of the main employee engagement surveys that exist, they actually have a statement in that survey, which is, I have a best friend at work. And the answer to that question is strongly correlated with productivity and retention and job satisfaction, all these things. And in fact, employees who say they have a best friend at work are 7 times more likely to be engaged in their job. It's just a huge amount. Second, friendship boosts productivity and innovation, which sort of makes sense. If we feel safe and we're having joy, we're more likely to take risks. We're more likely to feel trusted and trust others, et cetera. And the third thing, which is why this question ties so deeply to all of the work I've done on polarization and healing all of the ills of our society, is that we are in the midst of a loneliness epidemic.
Of a what?
A loneliness epidemic.
Oh, loneliness epidemic.
Yeah, the U.S. Surgeon General talked about this.
Yeah, my college classmate who we didn't know each other in college, but I was like, he's doing good work, that guy. Who knew the Surgeon General was going to get on loneliness? Awesome.
Yeah, and he also talked about the workplace as a solution to that. 61% of young people, so that's ages 18 to 25, report serious levels of loneliness. And we know that loneliness is as bad for your health as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. It's really bad. And so friendships at work, where we spend so much of our time, can serve as this tremendous buffer against stress.
The people who smoke a pack of cigarettes a day probably meet lots of other smokers and have good friends. Anyway, sorry.
That is true. You do. That is a great form of connection and bonding, is the outside cigarette. And so, in my personal experiences, has been very true. I'm curious about yours. The story that comes to mind for me, because it has lasted now over a decade, is I used to work on the Obama campaign. And my first true friend at work is a wonderful person named Juan Penalosa. We met many years ago and it started connecting over work, but a really deep friendship started to emerge. And that friendship allowed us to really crush it. We had all sorts of creative ideas. We created this concept of chicken and waffles Wednesdays and lasagna Mondays for all the phone banks that we did, which just made things a lot more fun. After every conference call that we ran together, which is a thing you used to do before Zoom, et cetera, after every training that we ran, he and I would huddle up and give each other feedback. And he wasn't my boss. I wasn't his boss. We were just really good friends who trust each other and knew each other. And so much of my sense of self and my growth came from those early mirrors, those early reflections back at me. And we just crushed it. We were always on the leaderboard. We ended up getting hired together to go to South Florida. And this was many, many years ago. And still to this day, he is always one of the last 5 people that has texted me. He's the first person I talk to if I need honest, genuine feedback. It's such a deep and real friendship. What about you? What do you think about making friends at work?
The thing I was thinking about, so first of all, work has been for me a very important part of my life. It is, I think, for many people, the number one thing they do in terms of hour count with their waking hours.
Yeah.
And so how fucked up would it be to spend most of your time on something and walk out without any friendships? And I think for me that there are 2 or 3 things coming up. One is that it's definitely evolved a lot over the course of my career, in the sense that in the beginning, you're working with your peers all day long, and it's easier to become friends. You have the lunch buddy you go out with all the time. And I think about, like, I still have good friends. I mean, it's sort of blurred from college club, thing, to the nonprofit that I ran in college,
Right.
where my two college roommates, who I just saw last weekend, were like the vehicle safety coordinators and the teachers of kids in the nonprofits programs, to early internship, where, I'm still in touch with my co-interns. Hi, Courtney. To early jobs. And, like when I worked at a management consulting firm, a lot of those people are still in my life. In fact, somebody just told me after a meeting that, like, somebody had, like, he'd run into some hedge fund manager who was good for, blah, blah, blah. So, but now that I'm the leader of a team, honestly, I'm friendly with my team. Hi, Mara.
Right.
But it's different because, and obviously I feel, and it's different with my business partners because partnership is a little different, but I find it hard to be friends when there's a power dynamic.
Totally.
And that means that most of my work friends now are people in other organizations. And so I'm just in less contact with them.
Yeah.
And so it's evolved differently. So that's one thing that comes up for me. But here's the story I'll tell is, like, one of the places where it's weird to make friends at work is when it blurs into romance. And there was this woman who, we became friendly. And then very quickly we started talking to each other at work. This is at an early job that I had when I was working in city government. And we would, and I was like, listen, I don't know if this is appropriate. Like, you're going to date somebody at work. Like, I was a prude. I was like, you got to get married. And like, for it to end up being appropriate. And we have been married for a very long time. And so, but my point is, it definitely went through a weird phase where we were secretly dating and not telling anybody. So that's, I guess it's, how does it evolve based on phase of career? And when friendship can blur into romance, those are the tricky parts, I think.
Yeah, I have had a weird career in that when you start your career in community organizing and political organizing, you start managing people at a very young age. So I've pretty much been managing people since I was in my early 20s. So I've always had to deal with this. Plus, in some ways, the reverse of what you're talking about, I've been a young woman, and most of my early career was pre the Me Too moment, where the kinds of things that were acceptable in the workplace were very different than the kinds of things that are acceptable today. And so for many years of my early career, I really avoided any friendship outside of the bounds of work for several reasons. One, I was really afraid that people would find out how young I was and that they would lose respect for me if they realized I was 23 or 24.
And gender plays a huge role, because, like, I was afraid. I was worried about being young. I was like a manager, and most of the people on my team were 5 to 10 years older than I was when I was an early manager. But also, I don't know, I wasn't afraid of people finding out. I was kind of proud of being a young manager. I don't know.
I was not. Now I look back and I think I should have been, but I was, and I was really afraid that people would lose respect for me. The second was the boundaries that we're talking about, which I think we should talk more about in a second. When you're the manager and they're the employee, and what does that mean in terms of favoritism, et cetera, and information sharing and all these things. But the third was, as a young woman, I was really afraid of putting myself, is how I thought about it, in a situation where I was around an intoxicated man, whether my direct report or peer or someone senior to me, who would then confuse our friendship for something that it wasn't.
Totally.
I really avoided all of that, and yet still built really strong friendships in the workplace that were focused more on our work identities and bringing joy into the workplace and bringing joy into the projects that we did and being seen for our work contributions, not necessarily the things outside of work. And I think strong friendships can exist with those boundaries in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what I hear you saying is yes to all those considerations, and it's a matter of being intentional about the boundaries. And to me, the word that comes up as I hear you, and I'm just curious if this lands with you, the word is power. It's sort of like, if you have power over somebody, directly or indirectly, it can compromise the nature of the friendship. And you can be friendly. Like, I'll just say there are plenty of people on, first of all, I genuinely have affection for every single person on the Bloomberg Beta team. But I also get that, like, if somebody laughs at a joke of mine, it might not be because I'm the funniest person in the room.
No, never. What do you mean?
And in fact, weirdly, I find myself weirdly, I think the power dynamic of management is that I find myself sometimes apologizing for, I would apologize in a regular thing, but I kind of make more of a show of it because I want folks to know that if I mess up, they can tell me things, because there's so many things that in a friendship, I wouldn't be worried about that, Totally. And by the way, being friendly with them doesn't make that any easier. In fact, in some ways it may make it harder because, dot. So that's just what I'm thinking about.
So I think that there's a number of considerations or situations in which it is a little weird to make friends at work. And we've just talked about one, which is power dynamics. We could do an hour on that or longer. If you're someone's manager or you're being managed, friendship can complicate things pretty substantially for all the reasons that we've talked about. Feedback is hard. It's hard to advocate fairly. There's weird flows of information. Promotions are weird. There's a bunch of stuff that's weird. But
I want to talk about promotions in a second. But sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Well, I just think that the majority of people watching it, they're probably not a manager, or you might not be a manager, and you have peers. And I think that there are still dynamics to watch out for when it comes to friendship at work.
So can I ask about one of those dynamics, or were you about to say?
I have 3 that I want to talk about. But
do it. I'll do mine at the end.
Okay, the first is favoritism, which is something that I have observed happening very organically in the workplace always. And you think of favoritism and you think of a manager who has a favorite direct report. Let's just exclude that for a second. Even between peers, favoritism can happen. It just tends to show up a little bit more like a clique.
Yeah,
where
it's subtle.
Yeah, it's more subtle, but it's really impactful on team dynamics. So if you're always teaming up with the same person because they're your best friend and you're always joking in a shared language, or you're quietly making decisions together, or you're quietly sharing information before other people hear it, others start to feel left out, and that can really hamper culture, morale, productivity, innovation, et cetera. Cliques really can erode collaboration because they can quiet people's voices and discourage listening, all of those things. So favoritism shows up even outside of that power dynamic. The second one that I am most concerned about, and I think is the most common, is what I'll call complainships, which are toxic work friendships that are focused on complaining about things. Friendships that revolve entirely around venting about the boss, the coworker, the system. And I want to acknowledge nothing in this world feels better than talking to someone about a thing that you've secretly felt or observed and having that person see it in a deep way and agree with you. So it can feel so cathartic to vent with a coworker, but I think it happens, and sometimes you need to do it, but over time it really reinforces negativity and stalls growth, and it just gets really, 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 really toxic. I will share one observation where I was the subject of that venting. I had an amazing member of my team who, over time, attitude started to get a little bit funky, while he also got really close to another group of people that are on the team. And one day I was going through some personal stuff and I wasn't being my friendliest self in a work meeting. I wasn't being, unkind, but I was a little bit less like smiley and joyful. And he texted me instead of whoever he was going to text. Can I curse on this, or should I?
Yeah. I think I already did.
He said, "Why is Lisa being such a bitch today?" And look, I've been managing people for a long time. You're allowed to say whatever you want about me. I don't need to be like, I don't take it personally. But I really wasn't being a bitch. And it was clear that this person was in a dynamic where they were enjoying.
They were in their complainship.
And so the way that I chose to handle it was, and then he pretended, oh, sorry, I wasn't talking about you. I was talking about my friend, Lisa, or, something, because he's embarrassed. And I said, hey, I'm not upset, but let's talk. And we ended up having this conversation about, look, you don't need to love me. You can complain about me. That's all very normal and natural. But I want to just share what I've observed managing teams for many, many years, that when this is the primary friendship you have at work, it actually stalls your own growth and makes you really, really miserable in the workplace. And if you find yourself every time you bond with that work friend, all you're doing or they're doing is complaining, if you're only thriving on your shared dissatisfaction, it's either doing more harm than good and you should just stop doing that, or you really need to leave your role and find an environment where you don't have so much to bond.
Yeah, let me offer one friendly amendment to that,
Please.
Which is, I think in general, that's totally true. More harm than good is something obviously you can only judge for yourself.
Sure.
But sometimes in a toxic environment, that complainship ends up being the path to people organizing with each other. Because there's a solution other than leaving, which is like, if the complainship is about the sexually harassing boss,
right,
or about pay and disparities, then the answer might be you start complaining and then you start working together.
So I think that that's really, really important. I'm so glad that you added that. So I think if you're in one of these dynamics, if you're watching this and you're thinking, uh-oh, this is what I do with so-and-so.
Yeah.
Ask yourself maybe two questions. One, can we talk about something else? And two, can we do something about these complaints? Or are we just having fun making fun of this person's speaking pattern, or, you know, laughing at this person who's a slow talker, or whatever it may be? Like, is there action to be taken? If so, take that action. Speak up to someone who can maybe do something about it, or just try to redirect the friendship into something a little bit more productive. And then the third thing that I want to just name is the other place where making friendship at work can go wrong is around consent. I believe that making friends at work is important. I think you believe that, Roy. The data shows that the majority of people agree, but not everyone comes to work wanting friends, and that's okay. For a variety of reasons, people might not want friends, or they might not want friendship in the way that you want friendship. And so consent is really important. Pushing connection on someone who's not that interested can feel really invasive. One little story here that sticks out to me, because I had an employee many, many years ago who I had to give probably the hardest feedback I've ever had to give, and I'll describe it. This guy, I'm going to call him Seth, which is not his name, was the sweetest guy in the world, like one of the sweetest people I've ever met. He was pretty young. Years later, I met his family, and he came from a family that was just like him, very warm, very affectionate, very, very, very loving. And he brought that energy to the workplace. You see where this is going. He would invite colleagues to the movies. He would give gifts to people. He would offer heartfelt compliments about people's hair and their outfits. And he would hug people when he would see them and when they would leave. And that was not a manifestation of friendship that the majority of his coworkers consented to or felt comfortable with, even though his intentions were so genuine. And so I had to sit him down and have a conversation with him about being less loving and hugging and the impact it had. And he was pretty young, and it was really heartbreaking for him. I could see it. And I could see for months him struggling to know how to show up at work. But it has been many, many years, and this person has gone on to have an incredibly successful career and life, and many appropriate friendships, you know, over the years that are still full of deep meaning and love and affection, all of these things, but just in a way that is more appropriate for the environment where people consent to.
Yeah. I mean, I remember we hired, I know we got to run in a second, but I remember we hired, at my old company, was to hire software engineers without looking at their resumes. And not everybody, but some of them. And we had them go through like coding tests and ... And we ended up with some incredible stories, like son of immigrants who married, was busy. His full-time job was managing his parents' restaurant in Maryland, but he could code, and, you know, that kind of stuff.
Cool.
But most of what we talked about was about the social norms of the office. Not most, a surprisingly large chunk was like, no, you shouldn't hug every person before and after every meeting. I mean, it was sweet, but a little off. And I think norms matter. And the other thing that brings up for me is life phases of like, you know, look, when I was a parent with young kids, people on my team were like, other teams hang out more and they like go out and drink. And I was like, that's nice.
Yep.
Not going to do it.
Yeah.
And, you know, and by the way, like as the boss, I remember I worked one summer at NBC News, and a great guy, maybe you know, Ben Sherwood, was my boss. Anyway, he ended up going on to ABC, and he's remained a mentor to me. And I remember we all the interns out to like a bar or a club after work one night. And he sits down, hangs out for like 15 minutes. He's like, I'm going to leave now. And I was like, why? He's like, oh, this kind of isn't my thing, but also you guys don't really have fun till the boss leaves. And it's like, good point. Get the fuck out of here. And so it was that. And my suggestion is that what we do is maybe we do a follow-up on how to make friends at work.
Yeah.
I would love that. Any parting thoughts before we wrap?
I think it's weirder not to make friends at work. I think it's not weird to make friends at work. We spend so much of our lives and our time with amazing human beings who have a shared sense of purpose and things to do together. So why not? The world is getting lonelier by the day. Might be the most important thing for you and for our society to make friends again.
Amen. I love that. I mean, it can be part of the reason I care so much about organizing is I think that those work relationships can be the glue between, you know, otherwise inhumane experiences and something that feels more human. To be continued. Thanks, folks. If you're here for the first time, the reason we call it This Is Not Advice is because we're not trying to tell you what you should do. We're giving you our perspectives on what works and trying to to share those. And, sometimes it produces emotional reactions. Thank you, Saleh. The world isn't made for affectionate souls like us unless we remake it.
Yeah.
And if folks want more, you can find past episodes on thisisnotadvice.work. And then please keep asking your questions. And, I would love Lisa to do this again. So thank you.
Thank you.
To be continued.